All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. Got all our panelists here now. We're also going to be making this available afterwards as a recording, and we're also going to be creating a web article kind of summarizing all of the main points that we go over today. So let's get started. Welcome to the Texas EVs on the Rise webinar. My name is Ian Siemens, and I am the Dallas City Hall advocate for Environment Texas. We are a nonprofit for clean air, clean water, open spaces, and a livable climate for all Texans. First off, I'm just going to go over our agenda for the day. I'll start off by talking a bit about why we're holding this webinar and the environmental benefits of electric vehicles. Next up, we'll have Buzz Smith, the Executive Director of the newly renamed Texas EV Alliance. Then we'll have Jared Wright, the Senior Air Quality Planner at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. And last, we'll have State Representative Armando Wally, who represents State House District 140 in Houston and authored a rider last session that mandated TxDOT study medium and heavy duty vehicle charging infrastructure. After the presentations, we'll have a Q&A section. Please put any questions that you have during the presentation in the Q&A box, and we'll go over them after the presentations. We called this webinar Texas EVs on the Rise because we are seeing unprecedented growth in electric vehicles in Texas today. The number of EVs in Texas has increased by 10 times in less than 5 years, and it'll only keep growing. As of December of last year, Texas was third in the nation for EV registrations, just barely behind Florida, and then a little bit more behind California. This year, we passed that 300,000 EV registrations statewide. A study commissioned by ERCOT last August estimates that in another 5 years, we can expect nearly 1 million EVs on the road in Texas. For comparison, that's 300,000 more vehicles than use diesel in the state. Given this big shift in how we get around, it's important to know the environmental impacts, how that federal money is being dispersed, how individuals and organizations can get on board, and what the state of Texas is doing around EVs. So, the rise of electric vehicles in Texas comes at a really great time. We expect that in 2025, 34 Texas counties will have some level of non-attainment status for at least one air pollutant under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Most of the counties shown here are in non-attainment for either ground level ozone pollution, sulfur dioxide, or particulate matter. 10 are in non-attainment for one or more sizes of particulate matter. The American Lung Association also ranks 14 of these Texas counties as having an F for their ozone pollution rankings, and 3 of them as having a D. Texas is getting a failing grade at air quality, and a primary cause of this situation is tailpipe emissions from internal combustion engine vehicles. So let's talk about why ground level ozone and particulate matter are so dangerous. So ground level ozone causes reduced functioning of the respiratory system. The people who are most at risk are children, people with asthma, older adults, and people who have to work outdoors. This reduction in function causes coughing, lung and throat irritation, wheezing, and trouble breathing, as well as weakens your immune system to respiratory illnesses. Ozone doesn't directly come out of your car's tailpipe. It's instead created when the volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides that are generated by your car come into contact with sunlight. Particulate matter, those are tiny particles. The EPA divides them into 2 main categories. Smaller than 10 microns, which you can see here in the middle, are pretty tiny. You can fit about 5 of them across the width of a single human hair, and 2.5 microns in size. And you can fit about 4 of those across one of those PM10 size particles. So these are so tiny, they get really deep in your lungs and can even enter your bloodstream. And they cause things like heart attacks, lung cancer, irregular heartbeat, decreased lung function, and low birth weight in babies. One of the primary causes of these particles, especially those under the 2.5 microns, are internal combustion engines. The World Health Organization estimates that around 7 million premature deaths are caused every year by air pollution. And the Lancet Commission on Public Health estimates that 95% of those deaths are caused by particulate matter pollution, making it the single deadliest type of air pollution we know of. So these are the primary pollutants of concern created by internal combustion engines and the percentage of their total prevalence that is directly attributable to vehicles that we see on the road every day. I'll highlight here that nearly a quarter of US CO2 emissions come from the tailpipes of cars and trucks, and Texas is one of the largest sources of that pollution. So you can see here, according to the Climate Trace database in 2022, Dallas had the third highest CO2 emissions of any metro area in the world, and Houston was number 5. So yes, that includes literally every city. Dallas is number 3, Houston is number 5. We need to eliminate this huge source of CO2 really soon if we're going to prevent the worst effects of climate change. So to do that, we have to transition to electric vehicles. That's going to be a big part of the solution. Obviously, we can move a lot of people off onto transit and biking and pedestrians. That's great, but we know that a large number of people will still need to drive a car. So the great thing about electric vehicles is they don't generate ozone or particulate matter pollution. So that would prevent thousands of premature deaths across Texas every year. Additionally, the lifetime CO2 emissions are already less than half of an ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine. And we know that they'll just keep getting greener as we transition to more renewable energy. Lastly, we know that we can reuse old EV batteries as stationary energy storage to help stabilize the grid or make sure that you have backup power on your house even. So we also know that we can recycle lithium nearly an infinite number of times, kind of similar to aluminum. It's just a metal. And so doing that recycling, we can further reduce the environmental impact of electric vehicles by implementing higher levels of recycling. So this chart shows the emissions comparison between battery electric vehicles and ICE vehicles across several countries. You'll notice here that the biggest difference, the place where we can gain the most from transitioning to battery electric vehicles, is the United States. And lastly, I just wanted to plug our new edition of our Environment America Renewables on the Rise report that has data on EVs and renewable energy for every US state compared. And you can look out for that on next Wednesday on October 23rd. But with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to the Executive Director of the Texas EV Alliance, Buzz Smith. Take it away.
Thanks, Ian. Howdy, everybody. Welcome to the presentation. I'm going to talk about fun stuff about EVs. So the first thing I'll tell you about our organization, we're about a 6.5, 7-year-old nonprofit. We're headquartered in Austin. We have 2 divisions to our nonprofit. I am the chief executive of our 501c6, which lobbies the state government and local governments for EV positive policies. I've personally been driving electrically since 2012, when my wife and I both switched to plug-in vehicles. We have a 501c3 that is our education project, and they are funded primarily by grants, and they are not allowed to do lobbying. And so they are out there educating the public with EV road shows, seminars, things of that sort. So let's talk about EVs and why you'll probably want one as your next vehicle. One of the things that comes up a lot is people talk about how expensive EVs are. And when they first came out, they absolutely were. You know, the Tesla Model S debuted at around $90,000, and most people just can't afford a car of that price. But the thing about an EV is that you have to look at total cost of ownership, not just the original price. Now, that being said, there are a whole generation of EVs coming to market right now that are available right now that have dropped down in price, some into the high $20,000 range. And these are available in Texas. General Motors in particular has the Chevy Equinox. The 1LT is going to be in the high 20s, but qualifies for a $7,500 income tax credit, which drops it down into the low 20s. That's not the only savings, though. There are things about EVs that inherently make them cheaper to own. One of which is Typically, an EV does not have a transmission, so there's no maintenance on the transmission. There's no filter or fluid to replace. The same is true of oil. Almost all EVs have no oil on board, so there's no oil or oil filter to change. There's no spark plug, timing belt that has to be changed in an ICE engine. Of course, no exhaust system. So there's a lot fewer things to break down. But the really big news is the fuel savings. And this is what blew me away and actually got me to buy my very first plug-in vehicle. I was looking at I'd had a convertible that I'd had my heart set on forever that was not electric. And at the time that I was involved in a car accident that totaled my car, gasoline was $4.50 a gallon. And it turned out that the convertible I wanted was a V8. So I could afford the car, I could afford the gas, but I couldn't afford both. Well, this spreadsheet that you're seeing on your screen right now, hopefully you're seeing it, is a spreadsheet that I used when I sold vehicles for a living. And it's the way that I would tell the story of how much the fuel cost, or how much lower the fuel cost is for an EV and what that means to your total cost of ownership. So I just checked today, the federal government says as of this month, the average price of multiple different grades of gasoline in Texas is $2.81 a gallon. On the window sticker of an EV, you'll see this magic number. How many kilowatt hours can you get out of 28 miles per gallon? The government also has something they call an MPGE, or miles per gallon equivalent spec, which really is not accurate, because to really compare the cost of getting down the road, the government's just looking at how much energy is in a gallon of gasoline versus a kilowatt hour of electricity, and figuring out based on how many kilowatts it takes to get down the road versus how many gallons are rough equivalent for miles per gallon. The difference is that different EVs have different efficiencies, just like gasoline cars. Different people can get different prices for their electricity depending on where they live and who their electricity company is. And of course, gasoline varies from gas station to gas station. But here I've taken the Chevy Bolt EV. It's just dropped out of production for General Motors, but the Equinox is going to have similar numbers. So per 100 miles, it uses about 28 kilowatts of energy. Well, in Texas, it's fairly easy to buy electricity for 12 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, if a gallon of gas is $2.81, then to get down the road, we're talking about going the equivalent distance in a vehicle that gets 28 miles per 100, or 100 miles per 28 kilowatt hours of electricity, or a car that gets 30 miles per gallon, I would have to have a car that gets 84 miles per gallon, to be a gasoline car with 84 miles per gallon, to have an equal fuel cost. And we all know very few cars out there, read that as none, get 84 miles per gallon. Another way to look at it is, what would gasoline have to cost for that 30 mile per gallon car to cost the same to go a mile down the road as this electric vehicle? And it's $1.01 per gallon. You're not going to see that again anytime soon. Now we're going to go on to the presentation now. And y'all are seeing that, it looks like. Okay. So there are other advantages to EVs. One of them is it can power your home in the case of a blackout. It can also help support the grid if the grid is if demand is approaching grid capacity. And how can that be done? Well, it's technology that's called V2X. That's vehicle to whatever. And some of the basic forms of V2X that have been available in some of the very earliest EVs, the first one's called vehicle to load, or vehicle to or V2L. And that means that the car either has a 110 outlet on it, or it has another outlet that is powered by an inverter, but it is able to output DC energy from the battery in AC, which is what your home uses. And you can plug in just one or two items. It might be a freezer, it might be a refrigerator, so that the expensive food that you've put in these devices, doesn't go bad while the power is down. It's limited in what it can do, but since you're unplugging that item from the wall and plugging it into your car, there's still no connection to the grid. So you haven't helped the grid other than taking that one item's load off the grid. The next step up that is called vehicle to home, or V2H. And that requires that your home be able to be disconnected from the grid. Now, the reason for that is your electric battery in your car could electrify and electrocute workers trying to get the grid back up again. So when the grid goes down, you have to have an automatic switch that disconnects your home from the grid. And that makes the cost of this a little more expensive. You also have to have a bidirectional charger. So you do some more investing here, just as if you would to get a generator for your home. But now you've got an electric vehicle that, if let's say the power outage is fairly limited in the city you're in, and you can drive, say, 30 minutes away and refill the car, you can bring more energy back. We just saw in the storms that went through Louisiana, for instance, that the gas stations lost power, and so people who had diesel generators couldn't get diesel. They also had some pipeline failures during that time, which exacerbated that problem. But with this, you can power your home with something like a Ford F-150 Lightning, which can power a typical American home for about 3 days. So that's a really big deal. Now, the next step from that is vehicle to grid. Now, right now, you can feed energy from your vehicle to the grid through your current electric retailer in Texas, and they're going to pay you. Well, some of them will pay you for that, some of them won't. Some will pay full retail, some will pay wholesale. So to get the maximum advantage out of this, you have to be looking, you have to shop around for who's going to give you the best deal. Now, vehicle to grid, even though it's going to feed that energy to the grid, does need a bidirectional charger. It does still need to be disconnected from the grid at times. So it will be a little bit more expensive, or not a little bit more expensive, considerably more expensive than, say, a $500 dumb charger that you can get for your house. But again, it can keep your house up and running if the grid goes down, and it can support the grid when the grid is under strain. Now, one of the things that we can do to protect the grid when it's under strain is actually keep that energy for ourselves in our own home and disconnect our home from the grid. So now we're not a load. We're supporting ourselves, and we're the energy that we would normally use, the grid can provide to other customers. Now, there's a lot of myths about EVs out there, and they're very persistent. I've been writing about EVs for almost 13 years now, and driving them for almost as long. And the same myths keep popping up over and over again. And the reason for that is we've become really politically divided as a country. Some of us absolutely have to believe that EVs are terrible. Other ones absolutely have to believe that EVs are wonderful. And they're somewhere in the middle. I personally think closer to the wonderful end. But this sets up, when you hear that same lie over and over, it sets up what's called cognitive dissonance, where when you actually hear the truth, it's almost painful for you. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard. And some people just cannot accept the truth because they've been told the myth for so many times. And here's some examples of these. The left, a lot of people go on the web and say, oh, this is a tar sands extraction site where tar sands oil comes from. The fact of the matter, that's a bitumen extraction site. Bitumen is used for treating telephone poles, and they put pressurized steam underground that brings the bitumen back out, and they refine it there on site. So they've got this, pretty little refinery looking thing with beautiful woods all around it. But on the right is what a tar sands field actually looks like. That's one that's up in Canada. They'll also say, how do you EV drivers feel? This is the world's largest EV or lithium mine. That's not the truth. It's actually the world's largest copper mine. It's real easy to disprove these things if you want to go looking for the truth. But if you suffer from cognitive dissonance, you think you've already heard the truth, so you don't look. You don't go out there anymore. Here's another lithium mine that is actually a diamond mine in Siberia. And it's interesting that they changed the color of the snow a little bit to make it look a little bit more like sand, to look a little bit more like it might be in the Middle East rather than where it actually is. Now, how did we get here? I mean, here's a picture of President Bush standing in front of a hydrogen fuel pump. Here's President Obama sitting in a Chevy Volt. At one point, both of our parties were for renewable energy being used for transportation. And then all of a sudden something happened. And it's my belief that it's that bottom picture that did it. I remember when this happened because that's when I had my Chevy Volt. And right after that photograph came out, Rush Limbaugh started going on the air all the time saying that EVs would burst into flames for no reason, that you could only drive Chevy Volts for 40 miles and you had to stop and recharge overnight. And it's a plug-in hybrid. I've driven to Chicago and back and treated it just like a gasoline car. So these were absolute lies that went out there. The other conservative media pundits picked up the same thing, and suddenly it became EVs are liberal and gasoline-powered vehicles are more American. Well, here we're going to see that this is actually not the case. This is Texas EV adoption. The areas that aren't blacked out on the left, that's Republican Senate districts. And the more red you see zip codes become, that's higher and higher EV adoption. The right side are the Democratic districts. And we can see easily here that most of the EV adoption is actually happening in the Republican areas. Well, of course they were. And why is that? It's because EVs were very expensive at first. Here's a study I did for the Tarrant County Commissioner's Court, looking at the 4 precincts of the Commissioner's Court. There are some people on the Commissioner's Court that are anti-EV, some that are pro-EV. And when we look at this, we see that in the beginning, the green and the red bars were the highest adoption. Now, the green over here has dropped off a little bit, but in the beginning, the 2 Republican districts were buying many more EVs than the Democratic districts were. And just here around April of this year, this blue district finally passed this one Republican district, but still the #1 district by far is the Republican district. Now, how do we fix cognitive dissonance? Well, it really is experience. You know, you don't believe lies anymore when you see with your own eyes that it's not the truth. And so there was a study done by Consumer Reports, and they said that if you have zero EV experience, you live in the United States, 40% of our citizens say, I will never own one of those things. If they see one in the neighborhood, that red area drops to only 22% that they'll never own one. If a friend gets one, it drops to 17%. If they drive one or ride in one just a few times, 10%. If they drive one just a small number of times, it drops to 4%. So we go from 40% of the people saying, I'm never going to own an EV to just 4% saying they want, and that's just through personal experience. Now, are those 4% insane? No, there are still functions that EVs don't address. Heavy duty towing for long distances on a regular basis. You know, if you're a rancher somewhere, for today, probably you need a diesel pickup. But in the near future, EVs will take that over. And what happens as that cognitive dissonance ends, we see the adoption curve suddenly take off. And we saw on Ian's graph earlier that that's happening in Texas. If we look at this is actual adoption in the state of Texas over the last 3 years. And we're trending along this red dashed line. That's a 50% growth year over year for the last 3 years. Now, just here since about last March, we've seen that drop down a bit. And that's when interest rates went up on vehicles. We all heard that, oh, nobody wants an EV anymore. This was affecting ICE vehicles and EVs. But the pundits, came out and said, oh, nobody's buying EVs, and failed to mention to you that nobody was buying ICE vehicles either. So where's it happening in Texas? The dark red here is the highest adoption. Now, these don't look necessarily like liberal or conservative areas. They look like high population areas in Texas. And if we look at an overlay of the TxDOT map for urban roads, we see that that's exactly the case. Now, what's really interesting here is as you go out into the much more rural areas, wherever you start to see the orange and red EV adoption really take off, you see a green blob next to it. So it's really driven by population, which is just like another huge technology revolution that happened just 25, 30 years ago, and that's cell phones. We could have said that cell phones were liberal because they were only being bought in the big cities and not in the conservative rural areas. But the reason was when they first came out, they were very, very expensive, just like EVs. Only the wealthy could afford them, primarily in the cities. And the infrastructure it took to make phone calls, the cell towers, were primarily just in cities. I can remember I was an early adopter, and driving from Houston or from Dallas Fort Worth to Houston, there's a 3.5-hour stretch where I couldn't make a phone call. I still bought a cell phone. It still made sense for me, and I don't even have a landline anymore. So The problem was that the infrastructure took a while to get built out. Well, the same thing is true of EVs. Instead of cell towers, think of charging stations. Where are you going to buy an EV at first? You're going to buy them in the big cities because that's where the charge stations were. As those charge stations move out to the rural areas, and TxDOT is in the middle of the NEVI plan to do that right now. We're in phase one of a 5-phase program. Eventually, every single county in Texas will have a bank of DC fast chargers in the county seat. The density of DC fast chargers will be about 50% higher in the coastal areas where evacuations may have to occur, and they want to make sure there's plenty of charging for that. So that's the presentation. If you have any questions for me, feel free to jump in now. By the way, Texas EV Alliance did have a goal. We've had it for quite some time now that there will be 10 million electric vehicles on the road by 2035. At the 50% adoption rate, that was a no-brainer. It was going to happen. This year, it's dropped down to about a 40% growth over the previous year, but it's still very close to the 3-year-long 50% trend. But I'm now seeing that we're looking like Texas will hit 10 million EVs on our road around mid-year of 2033. So maybe a year and a half faster than what we've predicted. And this has been reflected all across the industry. Every group that's gone out and did a study came out and said, this is, we're going to hit X number of EVs on this date. They've all gone back and modified their numbers, not just in Texas, but everywhere in the United States, because it is accelerating. Everything they had based their estimates on changed for the better for EVs. And so it's actually going to happen probably even faster than I'm predicting here.
Thank you,
And it
Buzz.
looks like we may have someone with a question. There's a Q&A down here.
Yeah, we'll get to that at the
Okay.
end. I have a few as well. And
Okay.
next up, we have Jared Wright with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. Tell us about yourself and take it away, Jared.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I'm Jared Wright. I'm a senior air quality planner at the North Central Texas Council of Governments, which also hosts the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. And so I'll share my screen here real quick and give you all an update on some programs we have to bring more EV infrastructure to the state, and also where you can find some of that EV registration data that Buzz was showing. So just kind of a brief overview of who we are, if y'all aren't familiar. So we are the regional planning agency for the North Central Texas area, which covers the DFW Metroplex and surrounding counties. And we're also the Metropolitan Planning Organization for that area. So we wear many hats here, and the third one there that we work on a lot is as the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Coalition. This is a Department of Energy designated program that is nationwide, and we happen to be kind of the local chapter of that for DFW. And so all this work that we do as the regional planning agency and the Metropolitan Planning Organization and Clean Cities Coalition is all in service of improving air quality in the DFW region. So as Ian mentioned earlier, there's ozone non-attainment throughout the state. It's a big issue in our region as well. So we have 10 counties designated as non-attainment for ozone. And then also for particulate matter, PM 2.5, there's some non-attainment likely for Dallas and Tarrant counties. So we want to try to get as many EVs and zero emission vehicles on the road and do as much as we can to help improve air quality within our regions. And a little more background on the Clean Cities Coalitions. So as I mentioned, this is a nationwide program from the Department of Energy, representing about 90% of the US population. And for the other coalitions in Texas that may be more local to y'all, there's a coalition in San Antonio, Austin, and the Houston-Galveston area, and we work with all of them closely. We just met with them yesterday. We meet with them all the time to coordinate on statewide events and webinars and things like that. So if you're not in the DFW area, there's other resources throughout the state to help you out from other Clean Cities coalitions. And here, I just real quickly want to go through the EV data that we have available. So you basically saw just the same map from Buzz. This is all available on our website at dfwcleancities.org/EVNT. And there you can see this data on a nice map there and go all the way down to the zip code level or the census tract level if you're looking at the DFW area, and see where EVs are registered in your area and how many are registered per city, and see how many, what kind of models you have registered in your area, and really get into nitty gritty of the data. And you can also download it going back into September of 2021, so about 3 years worth of data now, and see those EV trends that Buzz was highlighting, and you can really see that growth rate. So I've highlighted there some of the growth that we've already talked about. I won't get into too much detail on that. and also highlight that we've seen a lot of charging station growth as well. So there's over 3,000 level 2 sites throughout Texas and over 550 DC fast charging sites throughout the state. So you can download all this on our website and play around with it and slice and dice the data however you'd like. And I want to highlight some of the projects we have going on to expand that EV infrastructure and help support the EV adoption that we have going on. So here's 3 main programs that we have a hand in the DFW area. So first is the North Texas Reliable EV Infrastructure Project. So we are awarded $3.6 million from the Federal Highway Administration to repair and replace EV chargers that were already on the ground and identified as non-operational. So you've seen some headlines about when you go to charge an EV, only a couple of the chargers work and things like that. And so there is a real need to increase that reliability. And so that's what this program is for. So we'll be implementing this over the next year or so to repair and replace dozens of chargers throughout our region. And then next here, the North Texas Equitable EV Infrastructure Project. This is one of our bigger programs. This is $15 million to install up to 100 new EV charging ports in the 16-county region. So we plan for at least 50% of these to be in identified Justice 40 areas. We really want to address the need of equitability for EV charging and make sure that no matter where you live in our region, you have access to an EV charger, whether it's in one of the underserved areas and the urban areas or in the rural counties as well, where there's a real lack of chargers. And then last here is the Texas EV Infrastructure Plan. So this is TxDOT's plan statewide that Buzz mentioned. And for our area, that means about $60 million for the 12 counties that are in that darker blue, and then $10 million for those county seat sites that are those sort of red, weird looking blobs. Those are the city boundaries where those may be. So all in all, it's about $90 million coming to our North Central Texas region for EV charging that we're helping to manage. And right now we're seeking feedback through these programs on implementation of all these. We can see on the map there, all those sort of reddish shaded areas are where TxDOT will be putting in fast chargers. And then those colored orange and yellow are repairs that we may be doing with the $3.6 million program. And then throughout all the blue shading, darker blue or lighter blues, we'll be putting that $15 million to make sure our entire region has access to EV charging. So this will all be developing and being implemented in the next several years. So there'll be a real increase in federally funded EV chargers throughout our region. And here's some more details on the statewide EV infrastructure plan. So this is all managed and administered by TxDOT. And so as Buzz mentioned, right now we're in the middle of phase 1, which is installing DC fast chargers along the designated alt fuel corridors. So you can kind of see those through those lines that the blue dots are following, which is basically the major interstates throughout the state. So there's 84 study areas. So there'll be 84 sites for DC fast chargers throughout the state. 11 of those are within our metropolitan planning area, with 2 more in our rural areas. There'll be at least one of these typically every 50 miles, except out in West Texas, where they don't even have gas stations every 50 miles. But there'll be at least one every 50 miles in most areas, with at least 4 CCS ports, which is the port most EVs other than Teslas have today, and then also with the Tesla connector as well. So that's one thing TxDOT required. As many EV manufacturers switch to the Tesla connector, they actually require all stations funded through their EV infrastructure plan have the Tesla connector as well. So 99% of EVs will be able to pull up to any charging station funded through the program and charge. It's going to be implementing soon. I think the first site will be coming online very shortly for phase 1. And right now it's reopened for a few additional sites for another week or so. You can find all the details on this on TxDOT's website. And I wanted you all to keep an eye on this as I switch to phase 2 of the plan, which will be starting next year or so. We can really see the explosion of charging throughout the rest of the state beyond the major interstates. So if you keep an eye on the map and then watch here, as you can see, almost every single county will have an EV charger at their county seat. So in our region, you can see the counties that affects there. That'll be in the rural areas, and then the urban areas, they'll be working with the metropolitan planning organizations. So in our case, that'll be us. But there's metropolitan planning organizations in each of those yellow areas on the map, and they will recommend location and type of chargers to TxDOT to then build out. So our region will be receiving $60 million. That changes based on population and size of the metropolitan planning area. But that'll really fill out the urban areas, and then TxDOT will be building out the rural areas in the county seats. So by the end of this plan there, you can see the whole state will be covered with EV chargers. These will all be fast chargers, so you can pull up and refill most of your range within an hour or so. And here I just want to transition into a few other kind of projects and programs we have going on to support EV charging. So one area that's really important for EV charging, especially for those who aren't able to charge at their own homes, thinking about people that live at multifamily or rent or don't have access to their own private garage, workplace charging can kind of fulfill that need. So we're partners on the Empower project that provides support and resources to employers and employees interested in workplace charging. So we have a survey on our website, or you can contact us at cleancities@ncpog.org if you're in our region and interested in offering workplace charging or interested in getting more workplace charging in your area. And you can find more details on this at workplacecharging.com. It's a nationwide program, and we're just kind of the local entity helping promote it. This is really an area that we see as very important for EV charging in the future, not just the publicly accessible charging I mentioned earlier, but workplace charging is really where a lot of needs of charging can be filled. If people are able to charge, while they're there at work, get their daily range fulfilled. And then hand in hand with that, we want to work to ensure that we're reducing costs of EV charger installation where we can. So the International Energy Conservation Codes were just updated earlier this year with some minimum parking space requirements for making parking spots EV capable, EV ready, or have full EV chargers in them. So basically that's different amounts of readiness as far as like the conduit under the ground to install an EV charger. So even though you might not be ready yet to install when you're building a new building, they can come back in and already have the wiring installed, so they don't need to dig up the brand new concrete to install an EV charger. So that really helps reduce the cost. And you can have parking lots be EV ready much sooner. You kind of install chargers piecemeal and just do one or two at a time as more EVs are on the road. And so these are international codes that can be adopted locally. So we do have some cities across the state that have adopted them, but not all of them. But if your local city, your county adopts these, it can help your community be EV ready and can also earn points towards Charging Smart designation, which is another program we have going on to help support our local governments in achieving these EV readiness goals. So there's no cost to this, it's free technical assistance, and offers a designation program. So it's very similar to a solar program that we had going on as well, where local governments can earn points towards Charging Smart designation status. You can find more details on this at dfwcleancities.org/chargingsmart. Basically working to make sure local governments in our region are working to help EVs be adopted in their region through these sort of adopting these codes and making sure local developers are aware of these, so we can have more EVs, be ready to be adopted at multifamily properties, workplaces, as well as local residences. And then here I also want to wrap up with a discussion of electric vehicles in our region. So here I just want to highlight some projects we have going on in our region. So each year we do a survey of fleets in our region, typically local governments and private entities as well, on how many alternative fuel vehicles they have, including electric vehicles. So this is brand new data we just finished up a couple months ago of local cities in our region that have adopted electric vehicles. So it's not just local citizens that get EVs. We're seeing a lot of fleets adopt EVs as well. So we have from self-reported data from these local fleets, about 12 local cities that have adopted over 90 electric vehicles. And so you can see some of the leaders there. City of Carrollton has 25 electric vehicles in their fleet. City of Dallas, 17, Louisville, 12. The list goes on. So we've really seen this data shift a lot in the past few years as more and more cities are adopting EVs. Used to be, one or two as a pilot project, and now they're really kind of going all in and being able to see where they can shift a lot of their fleet vehicles to electric, where they might not travel a lot of miles. They might be able to quickly recharge at the home base at night. So it's a really great use case for electric vehicles. And a lot of cities are starting the planning work for this. So the City of Dallas, then Plano, as well as Dallas County and DFW Airport are integrating vehicle electrification as part of their long-term plans. And coming soon to our region, or we already have a electric fire truck, all electric, as well as electric police patrol vehicle and a couple electric refuse trucks. And we're also working to help our local fleets along this journey by creating an alternative fuel planning template, which will include electric vehicles, to help them plan the transition of their fleets from conventional gasoline, diesel to electric vehicles. So that'll be coming soon. And then as I wrap up here, my last few slides are just on available funding for these fleets to transition to electric vehicles. So a lot of this funding comes from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the state environmental agency, through the Texas Emissions Reduction Plan. So I won't go through all of these, but they have a plethora of programs. You can see here, most of these will fund electric vehicles. I believe everything here will fund EVs in some capacity. So a few of these are opening soon. Those in bold, there will be opening in the next few months or are already open. And then you can stay up to date on these funding opportunities on our own webpage at ntdcog.org/AQ funding. Each of these programs has their own requirements on what is eligible, but typically it may be restricted based on being in an ozone non-attainment region. But these are all statewide typically, and you can see that our funding webpage. And then TCEQ also administers the Texas Volkswagen Environmental Mitigation Program. And so right now this is open for the all-electric grant round. So this is all coming from the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal from several years ago. This is funding to the states to replace existing diesel vehicles with electric vehicles. So this applies to larger, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles. And we're kind of at the tail end of this funding. So right now, about $78 million of $86 million has been requested. There's about $8 million left, so we expect this will go in the next couple months. So if any of your local cities or counties or private entities are eligible as well, are interested in this, they should apply soon. But local governments get the best bang for their buck here and can replace for up to 100% of the cost of the replacement vehicle of electric. So this is a really great place to get some all-electric replacements in your area. And you can see there what's eligible: freight, drayage trucks, school, shuttle, and transit buses, which are a great application for EVs, as well as airport and then some other cargo handling. And a couple other programs I want to highlight real quick that are available. These are national programs. So these first few are from the Environmental Protection Agency. They have two clean school bus programs, the rebates, which are a little bit more easier to apply to, but it's a random lottery on who gets it. And then the grants, which are a larger application, and there's some more stringent requirements for that. But each of these are funding for EV school buses, and so, or any other alternative fuel. But you can see there the amount varies up to $325,000 for the rebates, which are open now until January 9th. So if any school districts are interested in this program, they have a couple more months to apply. And then the grants, which is that larger application, expected to open in 2025. And the EPA also has the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act funding, which we offer in our own region. We'll apply to this money and then give it out to local fleets in our region. So there may be some similar cases depending on your area. And this is to retrofit or replace older diesel vehicles with alternative fuels. And if the alternative fuel is electric, the replacement is covered up to 45%. So this opens each year. It just closed a couple months ago for this year. We expect it to open up again in 2025. And then last year, there's a commercial EV and fuel cell EV tax credit. So you all may know there's a tax credit for EVs at consumer level that you can also take at the dealership. And then it's also applicable to fleets. So purchase or lease of EVs is $7,500 for less than 14,000 pounds or light duty, and $40,000 if it's a heavy duty EV. So that's currently open for the next several years until like 2029 or so. So there's really not an effective deadline on that right now. But this is a great opportunity to take advantage of local fleets adopting EVs. And even if it's a local government or a tax exempt entity, they can take advantage of this tax credit through direct pay. And so the IRS has some details on that on their website there. But that's everything I had. Always feel free to reach out to us at cleancities@ntdcog.org with any questions. And then there's our contact info for myself and Lori Clark, our Senior Program Manager and the Dallas-Fort Worth Clean Cities Director. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jared. And next up, we have a conversation with Representative Armando Wally. Thank you so much for being here, Representative.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell us more about what is Rider 48. What is it, and why did you author it in the last regular session?
Well, first of all, I want to shout out my staff. Kara Santucci is my chief of staff. She brought this to our attention, and it's been an issue that we, in general, in our office, we care about. We like to nerd out on some of this stuff, and get into the weeds. And short of passing monumental legislation, what most members of the legislature want to do, we used our position as chairman of Article 6, 7, and 8 of the state budget to include in the rider, include in the budget actually, a rider, which again has been mentioned, Rider 48, to study under TxDOT's purview, gathering experts in the field to really study heavy and light duty trucks and how we can build out the charging station infrastructure throughout the state. And so we charged TxDOT to conduct this 2-year evaluation of how we can move forward in that infrastructure process.
Great. And so why did y'all target medium and heavy vehicles with this study in particular?
Well, look, I'm from Houston, and so we have a lot of truck. Well, Texas just has a huge truck traffic presence, right? So when you're talking about Laredo, Webb County, the largest land port in the U.S., but also you also have container and trade that comes out of all of our ports, but particularly the Port of Houston. It's the 6th largest port in foreign tonnage, and so we get a lot of container traffic and truck traffic out of there, but also from that medium. Obviously, that's the heavy part of it, but the medium duty trucks as well. And so there's an opportunity for Texas to lead on this, and I'm glad that TxDOT is taken it on and put out a study, put out a report here that was issued a couple of weeks ago. And so we're just glad to be part of the process of being more forward thinking as we build out these charging stations. From the federal government, obviously there's some some dollars that are being expended, but we in Texas have to be a little bit more aggressive on that front as the transition to these vehicles starts to speed up, as your other panelists have mentioned.
Absolutely. And I'll also kind of note from the environmental perspective that those large, heavy-duty diesel engines are the largest cause of particulate matter from transportation. So, trying to transition all of these large engine vehicles to electric will have a really large health impact for those communities that are around the port region, for instance. On the report, what were some of the major recommendations on that report?
So right now, what the main thing was getting people together, right? To get industry together, get government, get policymakers, and then obviously our advocates in your shop, right? We need folks to let us know, because I'm a policymaker. We're not necessarily experts in particular fields, but I know what I don't know, right? And I know that the future with this issue with EVs, obviously in general with the smaller vehicles, but quite frankly in the heavy duty vehicles is the future. And so I think it's important that we continue down this path to get the experts together, right? One is to get the experts together, get a policy report going, and create a task force, right? But also to encourage the build out that infrastructure, but let alone encourage the build out, but be smart about how we plan that out and where these charging stations are going to go. Look, it doesn't take a rocket science. We have 3 large metropolitan areas: North Texas, Central Texas, and obviously in our region in Houston. Those are the population bases, but we can't forget about rural communities either, right? Or these smaller midtown areas that these trucks are going to pass through, right? There has to be some planning on where these charging stations are going to go, right? And so you have 59 that runs from, again, I hate to, I'm not picking, I'm just Webb County to Houston. 59 is a heavily used thoroughfare to get product out of Mexico into Houston. Obviously, the port, you just have so many containers. You have Barber's Cut, you have the Houston Ship Channel that is very active in the container business, along with the petrochemical industry, but particularly the container business in Houston is huge. So we just have to be more thoughtful on how we plan that out. And Rider 48 is a step to try to get us to that planning process.
Great. And so kind of following up, now that the report is out and now that we have another regular session coming up where we can file more bills around EVs, what kind of legislation are you expecting to see over the next session around EVs? And are you expecting to see any movement from, say, TxDOT or some of the agencies in the next, say, 6 to 12 months?
So what we want to do is get those sane folks together, provide these recommendations, and then turn them into policy, right? And so for the 88th session, it was just obviously trying to get folks together to get the ball rolling, right? And now it's really for the 89th session is to start putting some policy recommendations on the table so that we can have a full debate. Look, Texas is the energy capital of the world, rightly or wrongly, but we have to understand that. Look, I've driven 3 pickup trucks. I'm a pickup truck driver, right? So even myself, so even as somebody like me who thinks about this stuff in a rational way and not as Buzz mentioned, cognitive dissonance. we science has to lead the data has to lead to good public policy. And so for me, I just think as a policymaker, but also just as somebody as an average citizen in Houston who understands and reads about this issue, we have to put these policies into practice and put them on paper so that we can have a full debate and not try to lead the discussion, not in a partisan way, but in a very data-driven way. And that's what I hope to do in the 89th and legislative session. Should I be on the chair of the Article 6, 7, and 8 that includes TxDOT's budget, I will continue to lead in that front. And frankly, I just about a couple of hours ago, I just had Mark Williams from TxDOT in my office, and we talked about this issue this morning. And so it's on the radar. It needs to be at the forefront as we transition in the energy sector.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to go on to some Q&A for all 3 of y'all. So some of these will be for the group and some for individuals, and I'll call those out. Thank you so much for answering all of those questions, Representative. I appreciate it. And first up, we have one from Michael Martin. Please discuss the anti-EV messaging that the EVs will crush the grid. So yeah, that is something that we have heard from a number of people, I think over the past couple of years, is that, well, Texas is having grid issues, so we obviously don't need to have all of these electric cars around. How about you, Buzz? How about you take this one for us? Oh, can't quite hear you. I think you might be muted.
I said I would absolutely love to. Our organization actually has several member companies that are electric utilities. So in discussions with them, there's 2 things that came out. One is the demand that EVs are going to put on the grid is about 2.9% increase over what we have today. Not that big a deal when you compare it to the data centers and the Bitcoin mining operations that are coming to Texas. We want to attract these businesses. I mean, we want data centers to build here. So obviously the grid's got to be upgraded. One of the things it's going to do is going to require money to upgrade the grid. Well, we have tons of energy, wind generated energy at night that we can't sell because people are asleep. They're not using very much electricity at night. And so we actually turn the fan blades on the wind turbines more horizontal to slow them down because, we didn't have in the past, we had no way to store the energy. Texas is now starting to, or actually, I think we lead the nation in installed energy storage now. So one of the things we're going to do, we're going to provide a lot of revenue to the electric companies so that they can modernize their operations, improve their ability to get electricity through the grid to us. By selling a product that they can easily generate at no additional cost. All I got to do is tilt the blades on those wind turbines and it's going to flow energy out. And most EV drivers will be charging at night. So there are some smart things we can do to protect the grid. One of them will be V2G, the virtual power plant project, which is just over a year in operation here in Texas, has, in my opinion, been a phenomenal success. People have been able to actually kind of play around in energy arbitrage. When the grid is approaching, when demand is approaching total grid capacity, we got to slow some things down. We got to turn off some things, and EV chargers can do that automatically. The CCS standard was originally created because it had that function to let the electric companies say, okay, let's slow down charging because the grid's getting under strain. But our EVs are going to provide that energy back. I've got 38 solar panels on my roof. I sell energy back to the grid today and will continue to do that when I get my stationary storage. My wife, and my wife is not a technical person at all, but she the other night over dinner said, "Hey, what do you think about getting some battery storage for our house?" And I've wanted this so badly. So there's so many things that EVs are going to do to support the grid. But as I said before, we are incredibly broken politically speaking, and those myths are going to keep coming out. Now, when you address a myth, this is from a guy who I've been involved in sales a big part of my life, mostly engineering software. But if you say, no, you're wrong, you didn't change anybody's mind. The first step of changing somebody's mind is what's called aligning with them. So I actually say, I thought the same thing before, but what I found out was, and you explain how you found it out and what you found out, and you've told them you're not dumb for believing this because I used to believe it too, and it's a better way to get that message across. So when you're out there myth busting, don't shame these people, don't put them down, align with them first, become their friend. And if you've got an EV, take them for a test drive. Because as we saw from the Consumer Reports data, that is the best way to get rid of all the myths and all the BS is take them for a ride in your car. Make sure you're safe when you do it. Punch that accelerator to the floor. That's what sold me my first one.
Thanks, Buzz. We also have a question for Representative Wally. In the few minutes that we have left, do you see any additional funding to be allocated to public schools to support the behind the meter infrastructure that's needed to upgrade to electric school buses and do that transition? Do you see any kind of funding coming down the pipe for those schools for the charging infrastructure, all of that kind of thing?
At the state level, I see a limited, if we're just talking about dollars, I see a limited amount of dollars going to that. I think what literally has been driving this is our federal partners and having a friendly administration on this issue that believes in the science, believes in climate change, believes that this is the way to go. I think to Buzz's point, we have to change the way we try to convince folks about this, that it's not a partisan issue, that this is where the market is going, right? And so we do have to invest from a state perspective on our schools, on their transportation costs. Look, it's our second public education, healthcare and public education are our biggest budget drivers of the $230 billion budget that we passed. And look, we'll have a surplus again this session. So for that person that cares about this, please come to the legislature and advocate for that, right? Because it's important that we hear from folks back home on the things that are important. But right now, I don't see a big push on that front from a state perspective, but it doesn't mean there shouldn't be.
Absolutely. And I will say to anybody out there, the best ways that you can make that change and make sure that that infrastructure happens is by contacting your representatives and state senators and voting as well. So being politically active is the only way to make that change. And then we have our last question for Jared. We have, has any of the funding for the North Texas Equitable EV infrastructure been allocated to NCT COG yet?
Yeah, so we've been formally awarded that funding from the Federal Highway Administration. So we do have that $15 million, and we're currently working through getting an executed contract with the Highway Administration. And then we will be kind of giving that money out to local governments in our region. All those sites will be on publicly owned property. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but we'll be kind of giving that out to local governments and public agencies within our region within the next few months.
Great. All right, and that's our time today. Thank you everyone for attending. Like I said before, we will be sending out those slides, sending out the recording, and sending out a summary of all of the points that we talked about today. I'll get those into y'all's emails. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.